The Cooker, Feathers McGraw, Preston the Dog, Victor Quatermain and Philip, Pyella Bakewell. Wallace and Gromit has had so many iconic villains, and chances are if you were to think of one, it would be one of those names. And if you were to ask me not too long ago, I too would have only known those names. That's because until then, I had never thought to explore other, lesser seen Wallace and Gromit media. This was until I was rewatching Curse of the Were-Rabbit with some friends whilst in Cornwall, and got to talking about the more obscure characters, you know, the likes of Mrs. Mulch and Mr. Growbag. Then I decided to look at Wikipedia to see if I could find any other wacky characters, and I found several names that I had never heard of before. But there was one in particular that stood out to me. The name Bill Cheesy Cheeseman. No, that's not an Italian brain rot character, that is an actual character from Wallace and Gromit, but not one of the movies you may have seen. As soon as I saw such an amazing name, I just knew I had to learn more about who Bill was, and in doing so, I ended up learning of the Wallace and Gromit comics and graphic novels. The one I started with, and now the one that means most to me, was Wallace and Gromit Curse of the Ramsbottoms. A story which not only introduces Bill Cheesy Cheeseman, but also an amazing villain I had never heard of. Curse of the Ramsbottoms was a 1998 graphic novel by Tristan Davies and Nick Newman. The story was never released alone, instead being paired with an even crazier Wallace and Gromit adventure, The Lost Slipper. Believe it or not, that story is actually a time travel adventure, and if I ever do a sequel to this video, you bet that's the story I'm going to cover. Curse of the Ramsbottoms begins with Wallace and Gromit relaxing in the living room of their West Wallaby Street home. Wallace is reading a newspaper article in which he learns of the mysterious disappearance of Bill Cheesy Cheeseman. Now, as his name suggests, Bill has a strong connection to cheese. In the world of Wallace and Gromit, Bill Cheesy Cheeseman is a famous cheesemaker from Wensleydale with blonde hair, a moustache and the curl on top of his head. And yes, his name is very addictive to say. Wallace is down to his last slice of cheese, which he somewhat uncharacteristically decides to give to Gromit. The cheese has an immediate effect on the poor pooch, who starts to have some kind of seizure. Rather than taking his dog to the vets, Wallace decides to deal with the situation himself. He initially decides to quarantine Gromit in his room, although his apparently vast medical knowledge leads him to diagnose his friend as non-contagious. Back to his selfish ways, Wallace enjoys a nice bunch of grapes while offering the sick Gromit cod liver oil and bones on toast. The pair are then interrupted by the TV, where they are shocked to see Wendeline, Wallace's love interest from a close shave, advertising a new cheese product called Wendelinedale. Suspicious that a woman that had previously claimed to hate cheese was now in the cheese business, the pair rush off to confront her. After an all-timer quote from Wallace with "foaming fromage frais," the pair end up crashing their bike for the first time, but crucially not the last time in this story. They then meet a somewhat helpful robotic scarecrow who warns them not to head to the home of Wendeline Ramsbottom. The robot then mentions there is a curse and names his favourite Wallace and Gromit adventure, the Curse of the Ramsbottoms. After another vehicular incident, the pair are kidnapped by a hooded figure and taken to Ramsbottom Hall. It is there when the mysterious hooded figure is revealed to be none other than Wendeline Ramsbottom. The vehicle is let onto the ground by two robotic gnomes guarding the front gate. The pair then meet another blast from the past in Preston the Cyberdog, that now serves as nothing more than a butler and is definitely not evil anymore. Then the front door opens, and for the first time ever, the world is introduced to Rhett Lester. Rhett claims to be an international cheese magnate, although when Wallace mentions cheese later in the evening, Lester claims that there is no cheese on Ramsbottom Moor. To ease some of the tension, Wendeline decides to turn on the radio, though Rhett quickly turns it off as it begins to broadcast a news update on Bill Cheesy Cheeseman's disappearance. Of course, that's something I mentioned earlier with Gromit's newspaper article. Bill Cheesy Cheeseman is still lost on Ramsbottom Moor. Meanwhile, Gromit finds my favourite comic, Curse of the Ramsbottoms, in the library. When he goes to grab the book, he instead finds himself being grabbed by none other than Preston the Cyberdog. Preston then throws Gromit into a large gong that looks very much like an oversized digestive biscuit. Then, at the dinner table, Rhett shows off one of his own inventions when asked to pass the butter, shamelessly ripping off a Rick and Morty episode which were released just 16 years later. Wendelene tells Wallace how Rhett not only created the little gnome fella, but also Wendelenedale cheese. She goes on to tell him that the pair are business partners and that they are due to be married the next day. To say Wallace found the news difficult to swallow would be perfectly apt, as the mad inventor begins to choke on jealousy, I suppose, although I suppose it's also up to interpretation whatever this is supposed to be. Later, in bed, Wallace decides to put on his thinking cap, not literally, although I'm sure he's invented one of those, and muse on the day's events. He decides that he and Gromit should investigate to find out more about both the curse and Wendelene's suddenly liking cheese. The pair manage to once again find the book on the curse in the library. However, as Wallace goes to take the book, the shelf spins around to reveal a secret room. While Gromit, true to form, solves the entire mystery of Rhett's identity, Wallace is more concerned about the amount of washing powder he's hoarding. Ever the detective, Wallace's big theory is that Rhett Lester is secretly a money launderer. As Wallace tells his loyal pooch his theory, Wendelene finds them snooping and ejects them from the premises. Whilst driving back home, the pair crash their motorbike for the third time as Wallace swerves to avoid a hedgehog. This story really does bring into question whether or not Wallace should have his licence taken off him. The pair crash into a fake pond that reveals yet another secret lair. This lair being where Wendelenedale is produced. This leads Rhett to providing his greatest ever quote: "Where there's cheese, there's brass, and when there's no cheese, there's even more brass." It is revealed that part of the villain's evil plan was peppering the pasture of Wensleydale with powdered soap, hence Gromit's seizure at the start of the story. That revelation leads Wallace to say the harshest insult he could muster. "You're immature." Lester then leaves to go marry Wendelene and instructs Preston to take the meddling duo to the cheese crumbler. Once at the crumbler, they find Bill Cheesy Cheeseman alive, but probably not well, as it looks like he is due to be crumbled. One thing that I like particularly about this is how Wallace nicely decides to introduce Bill in full. Wallace requests that Preston allows them to have one last cuppa before meeting their ends, to which the cyberdog obliges, providing that there is no monkey business. Wallace then breaks Preston's trust by indulging in, you guessed it, monkey business. He fills his portable, in-flight refreshment system full of soap flakes and shoots the byproduct at Preston. Gromit then frees Cheesy Cheeseman and tricks Preston into getting crumbled. Also nice to see another Doctor Who reference in Wallace and Gromit media here. Whilst escaping the lair, Wallace makes two more cheese-related puns, foaming feta and bubbling brie. Wallace makes another as they ride a huge wave of cheese while rushing to stop the wedding. Ever the dirty bugger, Wallace makes a questionable quip to Gromit that fortunately would go over the heads of any children readers. The trio manage to make it to the wedding just in time and break up the holy matrimony. They reveal Rhett's true identity as the former cheese nobbler, Chalky Cheeseman. That's right, the villain you'd probably never heard of is the evil twin brother of Bill Cheesy Cheeseman. Chalky's intense villain origin story is that when he was young, he was caught tampering with other cheesemongers' cheeses at a competition by lacing them with chalk. This canon event resulted in him being banished from Wensleydale. This event also fueled his hatred of other cheesemakers and their products, with Chalky swearing to get his revenge. Back to the story, Wallace grabs Wendelene as Gromit grabs the door, flooding Chalky out on a wave of his own creation. Chalky screams about revenge once again as he is whisked away by the cheesy tide. Some days later, Wallace, Gromit, Wendelene and Preston 4.0 go for a little walk and talk. With Rhett now out the picture, Wallace tries to win Wendelene over once again, however she shuts him down again, just like the end of a close shave. Wendelene reveals that she is now with Bill Cheesy Cheeseman, and leaves Wallace with a parting gift.
Cheese.
Truly a perfect way to end off a perfect story. One that I would love to see on the big screen one day. However, that would not be the end of Chalky's story. Now, of course, he swore revenge at the end of Curse of the Ramsbottoms, and fortunately that wouldn't be his only appearance, as the legend would return in Wallace and Gromit, Crackers in Space. Crackers in Space was another graphic novel by Tristan Davis and Nick Newman, which released in 1999, 1 year after Curse of the Ramsbottoms. Luckily, the Internet Archive also provides an audio version of the story, which means that we can actually have a Chalky Cheeseman voice reveal. The story begins with the pair at their West Wallaby Street home on the eve of Gromit's birthday. Wallace White is hard at work in his new meth lab making home-brewed cheese. Knowing that it won't be enough, seeing as there's no party like a Wallace party, he gets some balloons too. These are giant bone-shaped balloons that he is filling with helium for Gromit. Naturally, he attaches them all to his shed, going full-on Carl Fredricksen as it begins to lift into the air. As expected, Gromit has to save the bold fraud, releasing helium from one of the balloons, taking them both to the ground. Meanwhile though, the other balloons take the shed into orbit. The next morning, as the duo stands by the area where the shed once stood, Wallace is called over by his neighbour, Mr. Patel. Mr. Patel has a smashed up greenhouse and claims alien forces are to blame. He shows Wallace the supposed meteorites that caused the damage, although Wallace quickly recognises them as onions from his shed. After examining the situation through his telescope, he remarks that the Milky Way is curdling. After bits of cheese rain down, Wallace is more concerned about the type of cheese than the imminent danger it poses. When he samples one of the dairy-based meteors, he is outraged when he tastes Edam, as he had set his lab up to make cheddar. For once, Wallace comes up with a plan to save the day, instead of relying on his dog. The supposed genius inventor decides the only logical solution to the problem is to set up a space station and build a giant cracker shield to protect the Earth. After the truly shocking realisation that his stock of half a packet of crackers wouldn't be enough to save West Wallaby Street, Wallace is interrupted by Mr. Patel. Patel informs him that the space cheese is affecting the moon's gravity and the tides. He then proves it by opening the door to Wallace's kitchen, which is immediately flooded. Wallace names this disaster
Armageddon. You can't keep getting away with it!
Patel then suggests that someone needs to go up and destroy the cheese before it destroys West Wallaby Street. The trio then go to the basement where they find the original rocket from A Grand Day Out, of course the original 1989 Wallace and Gromit short film. After giving the old rocket a fresh coat of paint, they realise they're going to need help if they're going to stop the cheese asteroid. They decide to build a crack team. Wallace's first priority is that space is cold. His solution is to get a knitting expert in Wendeline Ramsbottom. When Wallace speaks to her on the phone, she points out that they may need a cheese expert, which is how Bill Cheesy Cheeseman is brought back into the fold. They find him at the site of his new business where he's trying to sell, well, you guessed it, cheese. Although they also find some unhappy customers who want a full refund and then some. After the unhappy customers leave, Bill seems very excited to see Wendeline, but not so happy when he realises that Wallace is with her. He's pretty reluctant to help at first, but agrees when Wallace points out that he can sell the cheese from the asteroid. Mr. Patel then puts the group through what he describes as training for the mission, but it's what I would call nonsense. I'm not going to go into specifics, you can see from the images of the screen the pure nonsense that they're doing here. On the dawn of the launch, the group are all left waiting for Bill, who still hasn't arrived. But then he finally arrives in a sporty red car, which almost runs them over. His car has a caravan on the back, which he demands to be towed by the rocket, as it has his cheese drilling equipment on board. Bill also doesn't like when Wendeline tells Gromit to get his bag, as he doesn't want anyone touching it. Banging and shouting can then be heard from the caravan as the customers from earlier open the door. It turns out Bill offered them a trip to space as compensation for the bad cheese. These random customers join the rest of the group on the rocket as they all take off. There is a legendary cameo as they pass the moon, as the cooker from A Grand Day Out can be seen waving as he is about to ski. We then get to the section of the story where there's just a whole bunch of pretty random events. The events all start when Bill decides to make a fry-up, then Wirral, the boy customer, needs the loo. His mum then demands for Wallace to pull over, and when he refuses, she pulls the lever herself. They land on a large blue sphere, although none of them really know where they are, and it's not explicitly said. I would guess Uranus based on what seems to be Saturn and perhaps Jupiter in the background, although like I say, it's not explicitly said. There's also randomly a skip of junk on the surface. Bill takes a vacuum from the skip, whilst Wirrell's mum complains about the lack of toilets on it. Then, when they're all back on the rocket, Bill decides to plug in his new vacuum for some reason, and the device goes haywire and sucks up the flight's coordinates. Gromit will have to fly without the coordinates until Wirrell's mum, who claims to be a jigsaw champion, can repair the instructions. I guess they have to just hope she's as good as Scully in that one episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
We're piecing together shredded documents to find Seamus Murphy.
Can I help? I'm really good at jigsaw puzzles. I do them all the time. It's why my wrist muscles are so defined.
No offense, Scully, but you can't be good or bad at jigsaw puzzles. It's just putting shapes together. There's no strategy or reasoning or logic.
Look, I got half a page.
Meanwhile, cheese is striking all over the rocket as they fly by the asteroid. Some of that cheese hits so forcefully that Gromit is knocked out, forcing gamer Wirrell to take control of the flight. Unfortunately, Wirrell is not as talented as Gromit at flying rockets, as he manages to crash it onto the cheese asteroid. Once on the asteroid, the group discussed naming it after Wirrell, although someone isn't having it. That would be Bill. Or would it?
This asteroid's going to be called Cheeseman's Comet. And if anyone objects, they'll have to answer to. And I don't mean big-hearted Bill Butter wouldn't melt in his gob. Cheesy Cheeseman. I mean... Aye, Bill's evil twin. Under this rubber mask, we're like chalky and cheesy.
I knew it!
That's right, that is how Rhett Lester makes his epic return, with one of the greatest reveals in history. Chalky then takes Wendeline hostage as he gets the others to go outside and start digging up the asteroid and loading the cheese into his caravan. In a callback to Curse of the Ramsbottoms, Wallace once again brings out the all-time insult of, "You're immature." Chalky simply tells him to shut it. Wirrell and his mum go to look for some facilities on Rhett's caravan, whilst Wallace tells Gromit to start digging while he supervises. Wirrell then comes running over to Wallace saying his mum's had a problem with the toilets. His mum, Mrs. Bingley, tells Wallace that they were occupied by a man.
A man? Hey!
Wallace and Gromit go to investigate and find Bill Cheesy Cheeseman tied up in the caravan. Bill helps them dig a hole for the detonation device as they load the cheese onto the caravan. Once done, they try to get back on the rocket, but Chalky doesn't let them back in. Instead, he shoves Wendeline out of the door with the explosives handcuffed to her wrist. Wallace reacts to this by mentioning his new favourite Wallace and Gromit adventure, with Wirrell joining in too.
Gromit says you're crackers, Rick Lester. Crackers in space.
Yeah, right, you're crackers. Crackers in space. Crackers in space.
We'll see who's crackers.
As you may have noticed at the end there, you can clearly hear a shotgun being cocked, although in the comic he is armed only with a black pudding from his fry-up. Probably due to it being for a young audience, they could only show it as black pudding and not as a gun, seeing as in the audio version it's not explicitly said that it is. As Chalky starts to take off, Wallace begins to panic. However, Wirrell leads the group to Wallace's cheese-covered shed. While Gromit attempts to file the handcuffs, Bill reveals that West Wallaby Street might not be in as much danger as originally suspected.
Comet Cheeseman's on a collision course with West Wallaby Street, you know.
No way, Wensleydale.
Huh?
This is made of non-league cheese, this is.
Huh?
The rennet to rind ratio is rubbish.
You mean...
I mean, Comet Cheeseman will burn up and disintegrate long before it gets anywhere near West Wallaby Street. It's got no texture.
Once through the handcuffs, Wallace reveals Gromit's birthday present, a remote-control plane. They then attach the bomb to the plane and fly it straight at the rocket. That's right, they straight up try and blow up Chalky Cheeseman, Now I know he's a terrible guy and may have held him at gunpoint, but I think blowing him up's a bit of an overreaction for Wallace. Luckily, he finds the eject button before his otherwise certain demise, while the rocket crashes into the sea, caravan in tow, just off the coast of Dover. Meanwhile, the cheese asteroid enters the atmosphere with the group still in the shed. They begin to blow up balloons to try and slow their descent, but they need more balloons than originally anticipated as they have an unwanted passenger on the roof. Naturally, it's up to everyone other than Wallace to blow up the balloons. They somehow manage to slow their fall enough to survive the ensuing crash, which landed conveniently where the shed used to be in Wallace's garden. We then cut to inside the home where Bill is reading about his twins' prison sentence. Wallace then comes in and reveals Gromit's birthday cake. And that's where the story ends. Crackers in Space is the last appearance of Chalky Cheeseman, aka Rhett Lester, to this date, and most likely his last appearance full stop. Chalky is a reminder of a forgotten era of Wallace and Gromit, where the comics were allowed to just have fun and explore any old wacky idea that they wanted, and it'd be great to have more of this now. I know most people haven't heard of Rhett Lester, and it's nice that there's this niche villain at the base of the Wallace and Gromit iceberg, although hopefully a few more people will know his name after this video. However, it's now been over 25 years since his last appearance, and I think it's finally time for his return. Because Aardman, where there's no Chalky Cheeseman there's brass, but when there's Rhett Lester, there's even more.